I'm going to call the Marathon County Infrastructure Committee to order. Number 2, rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. All right, moving on to number 3, public comment. I did not receive any requests for public comment. No one, okay, thank you. We will not have any public comment. Moving on to number 4, approval of the November 3rd, 2022 Infrastructure Committee meeting minutes that are in your packet. Any corrections? Go ahead.
I'll move for adoption.
Motion by Robinson, second by Seibert. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 5, policy issue, discussion, and potential committee determination. 5A and B actually go together, so we're going to have Mr. Griesbach address A and B. Thank you.
Thank you. What I threw on the agenda here today was just an item. I just want to make sure that the committee's on board before I start submitting applications again. The 2024-26 STP Surface Transportation Program is now up again. Usually that program is every few years, and seeing some bipartisan law bill came through that there's more money in there than ever before, so they are soliciting for projects again. We do have, again, as this committee has already approved, we have over $44 million, $10 million on the county side of projects coming up through 2026 currently, with about $4 million of that happening in 2023 with the Highway K project. So we're still sitting with about $6 million worth of projects. We still have need for more projects out there. So in the 2024-26 program, just looking at it early on, I would love to submit for 4 projects. Two of the projects these are all bridge projects. 2 of the projects are replacements. One is on County Trunk Highway P by Fenwood, and the other is on County Trunk Highway J out in the town of Texas over the Trap River. Those bridges would be for design and replacement. The Fenwood Bridge, and I did not go through the hydraulics in depth yet. These are some rough numbers until I hear that I should go forward, because it's a lot of effort to put some final numbers together. I'm looking probably about a $900,000 design and build. $180,000 would be our share. The Highway J Trap River Bridge would be about $1.25 million design and build, $250,000 our portion. And then there's, we're getting to the part where we finally can start rehabilitating some of these bridges instead of replacing them. We're getting caught up enough that we can fix them up and save money in the long term. So there's 2 bridges. One is on County Trunk Highway J, again, out in the town of Easton over to Big Sandy. Probably about $600,000 to rehab that for design and build, probably about $120,000 our share. And then we have Highway M over the Big Plain River, that's for just north of 153. It's called the Bradley Bridge. That is a huge bridge, 15,000 square feet for the bridge itself. So just for a rehab for that bridge, we're probably looking at $1.4 million just for a rehab. If we're replacing down the road, you're probably talking $3 to $4 million for that bridge. Our share would be $280,000. So those 4 bridges alone are looking at shared over $4 million. Our share over about $830,000. But again, I just want to make sure that this committee is on board, that we keep going forward with the 80-20 funding. Again, 80% funded by the feds, 20% local funding. It's still it's a good bang for your buck. And these projects are in need of replacement. And again, if we don't rehab them, we're probably looking at 2 to 3 times that cost replacement down the line.
Thank you. Go ahead, Supervisor Robinson.
Are you looking for authorization to submit or just informational?
Nope, I would just like to make sure that the board's on. So yes, I'd like to at least submit these and continue the program.
So you're not looking for a motion?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay. All right. Any other questions? I do have just one question on that before we get to that. The 2024-2026 Bipartisan Infrastructure Committee, or law, what has anything been actually accomplished through that in Marathon County?
We received a lot of projects. We have yet to spend a penny of that money yet because I'm waiting to put it on RFP for design. We have been awarded projects, but again, nothing has been actually spent, but we have been awarded projects in that.
Thank you. Any other questions, discussion? Okay, so Supervisor Robinson's going to make a motion to approve this plan that's on the agenda for both of it. It's 2024-2026 bipartisan infrastructure law and the surface transportation program. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Seibert. Any discussion? Not all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And Jim, will you keep us posted periodically as far as if we do get any of those projects that we actually are going to be able to do?
Yeah, well, I'm waiting to hear. They said I could still possibly hear this year yet when the County Trunk Highway J and T project with our projects that were approved in, those are roadway projects. They've been approved. They say I may hear yet before Christmas of when those dates will be, possibly as early as 2023 yet. So I'm still waiting on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Supervisor Gissman.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Just a question about Highway W. What's our plans for going north? There doesn't seem to be, I thought about bicyclers on that highway going north. There's not much room on the side for bicyclers. Just curious about how that's coming into our plan.
I'll have Kevin hit the dates, but that's one of those projects that when we go out there, we work on those. And I'm not sure when the W project is scheduled, probably about 2 or 3. So.
We had that one, it's in our 5-year plan, but not in the next 2, where we have projects down in the southwest and then southeast that are tied to funding. But
One, just so that it gets on somebody, because I think that needs to be planned out, because I think bicyclers, I don't think would go up. I mean, the narrow road itself for that major county road is pretty narrow, and just inquiring, that's all.
is that in the bike plan, do you recall?
Supervisor Seibert, you want to use your mic?
Are we talking
Tom.
24?
Tom.
Are we talking 24? I mean, how long a project, is that a 2-3-year project, 4-year project?
Those
From
are,
engineer start to,
yeah, time we submit, I have to have these submitted in March. I won't know till September. I probably won't have a designer on till 24. So probably the earliest we're looking at is 26.
okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Moving on to number 6, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. We have none. Moving on to number 7, educational presentations and committee discussions. 7A, broadband mapping update from Supervisor Robinson. And that is in, I don't know if you're going to be able to bring it up there, otherwise, if you
You can
don't.
scroll to the last page of the, there you go.
Thank you.
So 2 things relative to broadband mapping. This is a draft map that was prepared by Preston at CPZ, trying to incorporate a lot of the activity that has been taking place in the county relative to broadband expansion. The circles on there, and we can send this to you, is an attachment, but are basically the towers that Bug Tussle is putting in place, along with the fiber routes that they're running. The shaded, the tannish is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF, that Charter or Spectrum is doing. The red in the Croonwater, Knowlton area is the project that Bug Tussle is doing on the far eastern and the southeastern part of the county. That is a project that Wittenberg Tel or Serenity has been working on. What we're trying to do is look at those, and the dots that are on there reflect some of the responses we've got through the speed test. So what the Broadband Task Force will be doing is looking at where we have coverage and where we have gaps, and trying to identify where we will prioritize partnering opportunities going forward. Along with this, the Federal Communication Commission has released a first draft of an updated, what they call it, a fabric, or a updated map showing coverage in the county. And my fear, they're asking for communities to comment between now and January 13th, and we'll be looking at it in the county, but they've relied on the internet service providers to provide granular data to the property as to whether or not services is available. We're going to compare that map with what our speed test results are to see if they're, I think some of the internet service providers might be overstating performance. And the problem becomes this map, the new FCC map, will guide where federal dollars will go in the future. So if they're wrong and they're claiming coverage and they don't have coverage, we won't be eligible to apply for federal dollars in those areas. So it's important for us to correct it. It'll be an ongoing process of reviewing that information. So we'll be working with staff and the Broadband Task Force to try to provide comments to make sure that that's more accurate. If you look at it at a very high level, it looks like the whole county is served. You really have to drill down, and I think that, based upon my observations, I think there's a significant overstating of coverage by some of the providers. So I think we're going to have to truth test it and provide comments and try to make sure that what they say they're providing is actually available and to the public, because if not, we will not be able to get the funding from the feds. So that's it from an update perspective. Jerry, anything you want to add?
If I can just show a bit graphic here that John was just talking about. I'll just do up here.
Jerry, can you grab
Get my handy pointer. Thank you. This lighter orange stuff is where Charter is. We're expecting Charter to put in with federal money fiber to the home, and we know, actually, John and I just learned that they lit up a little bit of this right along, and can't do this very well. Right here, this just got lit up, and I believe they're working on lighting up this area right here. If you look at this, you see these here that with no orange in them, and this, and a couple of others on here. These are the areas that would have been done by LTD, and you can also see that there's really none of these circles are on here. Nor is the fiber from Bug Tussle on here. So, as we look into next year and giving out any matching funds to PSC or federal grant applications, more than likely what we're going to do is focus on these areas like this, in here, and here, because they're not served by fiber that's already planned, or radio point-to-point Wi-Fi that's already planned, or federal money that's already planned. So that's what we'll be working on next.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Supervisor Seibert.
In the northwestern part of the county, we've had an unusual amount of outages. Are the outages caused by the construction, the new construction that's going on? And then why is it taking 7 days, 10 days, 14 days to get anybody to come and try to fix it?
Is it Frontier outages, or who are we talking about?
I think it's Frontier.
That's sort of been a notorious problem for Frontier, that they have their
They've been
staff
blaming
is
it
slow,
on
and they're
construction.
having a hard time getting stuff repaired, for sure.
Yeah.
We've talked to Frontier about it multiple times, a lot more last year than this year.
Okay.
They were.
I know there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot of people digging. There's, at least 3 or 4 different companies doing fiber projects in the county right now. So there is a fair amount of, and Jim can attest to this, everybody's having problems with getting fiber stuff in the ground marked by Digger's Hotline. I've had three, just our organization has had 3 fiber cuts this summer, all due to stuff not being marked.
Okay.
So you see the trucks out, the white pickup trucks out that say USIC. Almost everybody in our county is using USIC. So Frontier, Charter, AT&T, Bug Tussle, my organization, all of us are using USIC to mark, and they're understaffed.
Okay. That's
So
all
that
the
is
people.
part of the problem. I can't necessarily blame it all on Frontier. Frontier is having a hard time getting stuff done repaired, but they're not necessarily always the cause of it. It may be that stuff's not getting marked, and I'm sure Jim and Kevin are probably seeing the same problems.
Stuff getting cut and stuff like that.
Stuff's not getting marked, and so contractors show up to do work, and they may look at it and realize, okay, there's some old striping here. I'll just assume that that's where stuff is from spray paint that was done 3 months earlier, for example, but it's not accurate.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
So
Just
Thank you. Go ahead, Supervisor Robinson.
Well, I wanted to just from Bug Tussle's perspective on their large project, that $25 million project, they've installed to date, or as the end of October, 110 miles of conduit in the county, 895 miles of fiber. They're working on their towers.
Dave, if you can bring that up, I think that's in the packet, isn't it?
It's in the broadband task force. I don't
Oh,
think
it's not in this one. Okay.
So I can send that out as well. And they're continuing to work on their towers. They've got 3 on the air, 13 under construction, 4 in zoning, and 4 in acquisition. So they continue to move on those. But
Can tell you this is the stuff that's done of theirs. This fiber run right here, this is the one that's done. It's and they're working on this tower right now.
so they've lit up Leather Camp in the down in the Croninwater area, and a couple of the
Yeah.
Little Chicago, and what's the third one that they've lit up?
Well, they lit up Bevent, the Leather Camp one right here. This one is lit up. It's not on here. It's right here in front of Little Chicago. I don't know why that's not on the map, but that one should be on here. There's 3 of them that are lit up. This is the one that's going to get lit up next, and this is important to us because we are moving the sheriff's communications off of the DNR tower that's right here to this tower. It should be done shortly, probably by January.
Thank you. Go ahead, Supervisor Seibert.
Are the counties working together? And Wood County now has 2 towers that have gone up right across the border in Wood County, and that's Bug Tussle. Is Bug Tussle? I mean, is the counties interchangeable? I mean, if the tower is in Wood County, is Southern Marathon County using that tower, or it's just Marathon
For cell
towers?
service, yeah, but we haven't put any sheriff's communications on any towers outside of our county.
Okay.
There may be one exception to that. I think that's Spencer one. No, that's inside of Marathon County. Yeah, there's one in Spencer.
Okay.
But
We-
they're serving cell service,
Right.
of course. Yeah, I think you're talking about they have a tower right here, I think, somewhere in this area, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Right.
They also have a tower over here, right outside of our county.
Yep.
And then they are putting in some other ones over here. I don't know exactly where they're going to end up.
Are they serving part of our county? If it's in Wood County, is it servicing our county, or?
That's a great question. They're only serving cell service on towers that they have contracts with AT&T to put equipment on. So not every one of these blue circles has AT&T cell service on it.
Okay.
Some of them do. The 3 that we were talking about do. Bevent, Leather Camp, and Little Chicago. Those are definitely running AT&T cell service. And then John, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think 6 or 7 of these other 13 will have AT&T on them, right?
At least.
That sound right?
At least. I think they were even talking about adding additional towers because of the FirstNet.
Well, he's trying to get AT&T on all of them because he makes
yeah.
revenue from it, but I don't know that he's done that deal yet.
Is AT&T going to be the preferred cell service then? For the best coverage in Marathon County, or if every tower has one? I know you don't want to promote
We as a county are
anybody.
certainly not picking a cell provider. I can tell you that at the moment, they're moving up, and as far as coverage goes, they're probably one of the better ones. As far as
AT&T,
as far as the square miles of coverage, they were probably doing close to the best right now.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't think we have any intention of supporting a particular vendor.
No, but I was just wondering if every tower is going to have AT&T on it.
They have a responsibility to the state to cover, through the FirstNet agreement, to cover for law enforcement a certain percentage of the state.
Okay.
T-Mobile's mostly been focusing on stuff along the interstate corridors. Verizon has already done that, and they're working on some other ones. And then Cellcom, I think, is the only other one that's got pretty good coverage.
Okay, thanks.
Supervisor Robbins, thank
I
you.
just wanted to, I was going to reiterate what Jerry said relative to FirstNet is there needs to be some redundancy for law enforcement. And so one of the reasons you're seeing Bug Tussle building out is that they are partnering with AT&T, and the advantage of the towers going up is it expands wireless service to those areas as well as cell coverage. But I know that Bug Tussle also entertains and contracts with other providers on their towers. Where we are is that when we committed to the conduit borrowing, where the Bug Tussle joined with 4 other counties last November and did a bond issue of about $70+ million, $25 million of that is going into Marathon County for the 370 miles of fiber and the 16 towers. We get space on those towers. We're still waiting for that access agreement to be finalized, but we have space on each of those towers where we can put law enforcement and other communication devices for the county. I would imagine that if we needed to or wanted to, and it was advantageous to the county, we could look at potentially those in Wood County and maybe attach some of our equipment there, but we'd have to probably strike an agreement with Bug Tussle and work with the county on that. But each county has their own access agreement. If they've done the conduit borrowing route, and that allowed Bug Tussle to have lower interest rates. So the advantage is you've got the wireless, you've got potential self-service, and you've got the fiber. The long-term goal of the fiber is to do runs into the businesses and homes along the route.
If I can just add
Thank
one
you.
more
Go
thing.
ahead.
There's the next big change in technology is for law enforcement communities to use their phones as push-to-talk instead of carrying portable radios on their belts. And so there's a lot of discussion. There's FUM activity. Because I'm chair of the Public Safety Broadband Committee for the state, I've been involved in that discussion. There's not a good interoperability plan at the moment. So that needs to be addressed. And what I'm talking about is right now, if an officer gets out of their car, they have a radio they carry, it's on their belt. That's their portable, what we call their portable radio, versus the one inside their squad. The one in their belt usually has less power coverage than the one that's in the squad car. So they can, go into a house or go into someone's front yard, but they're limited on range. If we have pretty good cell coverage and maybe better cell coverage than land mobile radio antennas in the county, you can expect that the sheriff's department will start using their phones as push-to-talk radio communications, and it'll be over the cell service instead of over the radio frequencies that we provide. That's the next big thing.
Thank you. As far as cell coverage, you said Cellcom has got pretty good coverage. I do have that. I've had it for years. The last year, it's been getting worse, and I don't know why. And that's in
I'm aware of that.
That's in Rothschild. So I mean,
I only have anecdotal information. What I've been told anecdotally is they got into some kind of argument with Verizon, and on towers that they were roaming onto Verizon's towers. Verizon has kicked them off some of them, but has to keep them on others because of their contract. That's only anecdotal information. I haven't been able to get that accurate, but I had my wife's phone on Cellcom until about a month ago, and I had the same experience. There was places that we used to have coverage and we suddenly didn't. So I mean, it seems likely, but again, I'm just speaking from anecdotal information.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Thank you, John and Jerry, for the update. We'll move on to 7B, MPO approved transit plan. And we have Supervisor Robinson, and we got Dave Mack here too. I'm sure that'll be able to enlighten us with some new information. Thank you.
And I'm in here as my capacity as the chair of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and that organization is made up of the chief executive officers or their designees in the Wausau Metropolitan area, ranging from the village of Maine down to Crownwater and Mosinee. And periodically, they need to update the transit plan for the area. Currently, the transit services are limited primarily in scope to the metro service area in the city of Wausau, although there is some 8521 services outside of that area. They engaged in a study that was brought back to the MPO, and I'm the county's representative because I'm on the infrastructure and committee on there. So we thought it was important to share this report with you, or just give a high-level overview of the report. It is a recommendation that's been approved. It was approved last month by the, or accepted by the MPO, and it's now up to the communities to deal with it. There's been a decrease in ridership in the metro over the last few years. Some of that's due to fare increases. Some of it's due to the shifting nature of where the jobs are located. And if you look at the current system, it really doesn't serve it doesn't serve commercial. There's not a single department store on the routes. The healthcare is expanded into Weston with the Marshfield Clinic acquisitions, and there have been limitations in the timing of the routes where it's difficult to take the transit early in the morning or later in the day to get to work, which creates problems. There's concerns over the frequency of coverage, and one of the purposes of the study was to try to identify what those needs are. Dave did put in the packet a sort of a summary of some of the issues, transit issues outside the city of Wausau, but the demographics are that we're aging. Where shopping opportunities, employment opportunities are changing. People that don't have access to a car have limited options in how they get to work. You're seeing more and more companies considering van pools or other types of arrangements to get people to work. Green Mountain's a popular destination because of all the retail that's out there and the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's hard to get to the services, and we've got income and poverty issues that affect people's ability to afford transportation. All of that led to a series of recommendations, and that will be up to the city and other communities to look at, including expanding the hours of operation, the days of operations. Some of the routes, there was discussion there about serving Weston, Crownwater, Rothschild with a dedicated route, running routes into that. Where we left it, we talked about it this week at the Metropolitan Planning Organization, is that the recommendations will be are accepted. Where the report will be shared with the communities over the next couple of months. We'll be developing questions for communities to answer relative to their future role in transit. One of the big concerns that we have is that with levy limits, it's very difficult to add new services, even though there may be some desire to try to expand bus service into those areas. The issues of can the local units of government generate the dollars, or where is it in the overall priority? We'd like to have that discussion, so we'll be working on trying to format it. The city and the county could step in and fund it, although I doubt that there would be a lot of support for the county having an expansive role in funding it. So it's really up to the communities and other funding sources to look at how the services will be paid for. But there's a framework for the discussion that will guide the discussion and going forward. There has been talk about regional transit authorities, changing that in the state level to create them. There's currently one in Appleton. The likelihood that the legislature will do that in the near future is probably remote. So it really gets down to, are the communities willing to do it? Will they work with the business communities? Could they create a business improvement district or some other mechanism by which they would pay for it? Would there be subsidies from those businesses to support those routes? Are there opportunities to bring technology in so people can track where the buses are on their phones? Simplify automate the fare process. and a number of other recommendations that are in the report. There's a link on the agenda. If you click on the agenda itself, link to the report. I encourage you to look at it. You've got, if nothing else, to look at the executive summary. But it is a guide to the future. I imagine that the county will continue to be asked to play a role. So it may be coming back to us, this committee or another committee in the county at some time in the future. But transit is important. I know that in talking to Dave Ekman from the Chamber, one of the things that young professionals look at when they locate in a community is how is the mass transit system in those communities. So if we're going to be an attractive destination for luring those people here, we'll need to look at what that transit looks like going forward, both in terms of serving the city, the metropolitan area, and potentially beyond. Dave, anything you want to add?
Thanks, Rick. Just a couple things. Thanks, John. You touched on almost everything that I would have said anyway, so that's nice that you're so knowledgeable about the subject. But overall, I think the plan was a great success. One of the things that we've talked about with our consultants that came in that we hired, we got some federal transit administration monies to help us do the study. And we created an oversight committee of local officials, and John here and Mayor Katie Rosenberg from the city of Wausau were co-chairs to that, and we brought in the communities and some of the technical people in the area that kind of deal with the transit. And so we had a really nice approach to looking at having the locals be involved with the development of this plan. And so there were three main scenarios that came out of what would be considered the recommendations for the plan. The first one is just for Wausau itself to do a lot of upgrades to the system on their own within the city, because that's where the service is being provided. They're looking at, like John said, some of the technology issues that are out there that could enhance bus service, GPS, Wi-Fi on the bus, things like that that'll help maybe draw what we call choice riders to the buses, people that are choosing to ride instead of those that are just dependent on the system at this point. And then they're looking at a new fare structure. They're looking at ways in which we can help people figure out how to fund their trips in the area. The second scenario is the one that we would probably be more involved with, and that's getting involved with them, moving out into the other communities and providing service into some of the outlying communities. The big four would be Rib Mountain, Weston, Rothschild, and Schofield. Weston, Schofield, Rothschild has had service in the past. They've helped fund some service out there, and one of the things that John was talking about with the kind of cost sharing and trying to figure out the cost of doing this work is there's the federal regulations say that if you're going to bring service from a community into another community, you have to have a cost sharing agreement with them. Now, the community itself doesn't have to necessarily pay for that. You could use other sources, and in Weston's case in the past, they've had local businesses help pay for the cost of service to come out there. Ultimately, that ridership didn't work there. The routes didn't really go where people wanted them to go at the time, so they discontinued their service. And so we're back to having just Wausau have the service. But looking at those four communities, Rib Mountain specifically is the one place that everybody that is a current rider wants to go to. All of the commercial shopping that is desirable in the area could be accessed by bus pretty easily there. And so that's where we may come into the conversation when some of these communities are looking to see if there's other support for bringing people to some of the other communities from the city of Wausau. Because some of those communities are saying that this is more of a regional approach, and so the county is more regional in its nature, so we should be, some communities are saying we should be involved. So that would be a later discussion for us. The third scenario that they have in the plan is not really desirable, but it's to cut back on some of the services that the city of Wausau has to save money to provide service outside of the city. And so that's another option that's out there. But right now, nobody kind of wants to cut service in the city of Wausau, so we're not really going forward with some of those initiatives. But this is a 5-year plan, and that we need to do every 5 years based on the federal regulations. So right now, it's taking a look at some of these key components of in-service enhancements, plus looking at the outside routes.
One of the other concepts that was floated in the study was the whole issue of fixed route versus microtransit. In microtransit is a system where it may be on demand, and you may run it at certain times. It may be a van, it may be some other way of getting people around. It's very popular in many metropolitan areas, and they tie into a fixed route. You know, the route may drop you off, for instance, at the county market on the west side, and you may then be able to grab a shuttle to a place of employment or something else. But that's a concept. Former Supervisor Will Harris was very supportive of that and really pushed that to be considered. And it's one of the options that could expand the timing or the availability of transit into the evenings and beyond the existing routes.
Supervisor Seibert?
I know availability of a ride is a big issue in my part of the county. A lot of elderly don't have doctor appointment rides, they don't have haircut rides, they don't have grocery shopping rides. Is Marathon County have anything or are looking at anything to assist outside of the metro area up here? I mean, we've got McMillan, we've got the city of Marshfield, we all need rides also, so.
If I may, Mr. Chair. We do have the 8521 program, what we call it. It's the Elderly and Disabled Transportation Program that we get funding from the state of Wisconsin, DOT, but it's designed specifically for the elderly and disabled. So you have to be at least 55 or older to take those rides or to have a disability. So for able-bodied people under 55 to be able to get a ride, we don't have a program at this point countywide to provide those services.
Where does the elderly access that?
They just make a phone call. It's the county service is through North Central Healthcare.
Okay.
They've got a transportation program that provides rides. You can call.
So they would call North Central Healthcare
Call North
and
Central
get hooked up?
Yep, and you can get put on their system, and then they will. You can call them. They'll schedule a ride for you. It's kind of an on-demand service. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of a program. But it does run through the whole county. They do take people on the western part of the county down to the clinic in Marshfield, St. Joe's down there. So
Thank you.
Thank you. In the 127 page, the entire plan is very informative. I didn't read it from cover to cover, but the executive explanation on page 31 of your packet is very informative. When I saw the issue or the potential for possibly going to Rothschild's for the retirement or the senior housing, in the last 6 months the VA clinic opened up in the Shopko store, and it generates a lot of traffic or a lot of people going to that. I don't know if that would be a consideration or if that would be through the VA, work with our VA officer or what, but.
That was one of in the process of getting community input, they reached out to business communities, community leaders, and others, and that was one of the issues that was highlighted as a need. That and the other healthcare facilities in the area. So it really is now up to what will the communities do with it. And you have a dual role as both the county board member and as a village trustee. I imagine that George will be bringing these issues back to you for discussion on the village board as to what questions do you have, what questions do you need answered. What are the steps forward, and what are the options and opportunities that lie ahead? So it really is, you've got a planning document that will be a guide, but really, if anything, it's an outline for communities to begin the discussion on what we can do next. But the VA in the former Shopko Plaza came up several times.
Thank you. Supervisor Gisselman?
Well, I think there's a role for the isn't there a role for the county here? I think that all these little communities, fine, but I think we need to give it an overall view. I mean, the Wisconsin River Valley area, the metro area, 80% of the population of Marathon County, from Rockchilds, I mean, and even what John was thinking about, that micro routes, though we should be providing, I think the people in Athens and Roselleville need some way to be able to access healthcare, entertainment, or whatever. I think we've been talking about this we were talking about this when I was serving on the county board many years ago, about the people throughout the county accessing what they need to get, and I think this is a county issue. It's fine to depend on the individual communities, but when enough of these individual communities rise up and say we need help, I think it's up to the county to start to step in and say, okay, let's provide a county-wide view of this so that all the citizens of Marathon County can, at least in some way, see the need and the availability of getting to where they need to go. The VA and right. So is it going to be depending specifically on Rockchilds? So people from Weston, I'm sure, need to get to the VA. The people in Mosinee need to get to the VA hospital. I think it's a larger issue, and I would hope that the county would take a look at this and see how and what way they can be doing that. I think they have to provide that whole county-wide scene and provide that leadership to see what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments? Any other discussion? All right. Well, thank you, John and Dave, for the update on that transit map. We'll move on to 7C, special event policy. This is a kind of the gift that keeps on giving for the last 3-4 years. Lance, if you want to start out, I know that the Infrastructure Committee, Public Safety dealt with this, I think it was in 2019, and then 2020 came around and there was the epidemic or whatever you wanted to call it, and that kind of put everything on the back shelf. So thank you, Lance, if you'd take it.
Sure, I will. And, you started out with a reference to one of my favorite movies, so it's a great start. I won't rehash the kind of history that we went through. It wasn't all that long ago. I was at this committee along with Mike. I think it was September 1st at your meeting where we provided all that history that Chair McEwen just referenced about kind of the impetus to this evaluation of assemblies is really kind of where we're moving. In the last several pages of your packet, I believe it on page 33 it starts. It's the existing assemblies ordinance. But again, going back to that September meeting, we gave that history, and the impetus to this again was we were getting these requests. Staff were getting these requests from the sheriff's office. Also, many requests coming to the highway department for local nonprofits to have county staff assist in the carrying out of an event, either on a public roadway like a marathon. I think Jim's example he gave the last time was, setting out barrels or signage. The sheriff's office as well, when we have a large event, anytime you have a large gathering of people, it's really good to have a law enforcement or security presence. So those sort of things. So we would get those requests, and that's what spurred this conversation, as Chair McEwen referenced, back in 2019, and former Administrator Carger, my predecessor, was involved in that, and we had those discussions. And what that led into was, initially there was this belief, hey, man, we need to address this. We don't have an ordinance or existing policies directly on point. And while that was somewhat true, we actually do have an ordinance that is on point relative to assemblies. But like I referenced in September, that ordinance after I asked Corporation Counsel to do a review, has some pretty significant drawbacks in terms of concerning sections based on a Supreme Court case that I made allusion to at the last meeting. So why are we here today? Well, if you recall back to September 1st, I closed my comments with a request that if anyone was very interested in taking a look at the assembly ordinance and providing some assistance to staff, because there are a lot of things that we just need to change based on the review that Corporation Counsel has done and the memo that he put together, that they are operational in nature. Things like, who are we going to have review these assembly permits when they're brought in? That really isn't a policy decision, that's an operational thing, and I can make some suggestions and have a draft ordinance that deals with that. But there are policy decisions that, quite honestly, that's not staff's role, that need to be addressed in this ordinance. So I'll give you just one. What size of gatherings do you want to talk about and regulate? Portage County, if you're a gathering of 300 people for 8 or more hours, you are subject to their ordinance. La Crosse, it's 1,000 people or more for more than 4 hours. Kenosha, 5,000 people with no reference to time, or 100 people between the hours of midnight and 8 a.m. Our current ordinance is 3,000 people for 8 hours or more. Now, as I referenced at the last meeting, I think a lot of that makes sense. If you have 3,000 people together in a space for 8 hours or more, they generate a lot of things and they require a lot of things. They generate garbage. They need to use restrooms. You need to have a plan to get them water. And as I alluded to before, it's a good plan if you have that many people together, particularly if you're serving alcohol at those events and food, that you probably want some law enforcement or security presence in an emergency plan. So there's a lot of logic to these ordinances. But some of those things are really policy driven that I don't want staff to be in a position to say, hey, we think we should regulate, the right number is 2,500 people for 4 hours, or if it's 5,000 for 2. I think having some leadership from those 3 committees that we talked about, this committee, Environmental Resources and Public Safety, would be helpful as we start to navigate those things, because at the end of the day, it's going to be an ordinance amendment that is going to be worked through our process. It's going to go through a standing committee. It's going to go to the full board. And it doesn't do anyone any good to have staff get up there and tell you our thoughts on what the policy should be when you guys, each of you, your board is going to be the ones evaluating those. So having that input would be helpful. So I ended my comments with, in that meeting, if anyone was really interested, they could raise their hand, or I think that was a request that Chair McEwen referenced, and I think everyone was on mute during that meeting. Nobody volunteered at that time, and I haven't heard from anyone since. So I'm coming back to this committee first, and I'm going to go to public safety next meeting. I really would like, if someone's interested, I don't envision this to be terribly difficult. Like I said, a lot of this staff are going to be able to do the heavy lifting in terms of drafting for sure. We can identify who is going to, from our perspective, where the permit should go. I referenced this before. I mean, there are a couple different places in other counties. We talked about having them go through parks before in our staff meetings, but in some counties, the clerk's office receives them. In some counties, the sheriff's office receives them. In our current ordinance, they are received by the Conservation Planning and Zoning Department, but ultimately, our ordinance calls for them to be reviewed by a committee that hasn't existed for a decade. So we need to fix that. And I think staff can come up with the process for how those things are to be evaluated, but you, the full board, is going to set the policy by which we exercise discretion to grant or deny those permits. And so that's kind of, again, I don't want to belabor the point. We talked a lot about it in September. You can go back and watch the recording. I watched it last night just to refresh my recollection as to what happened. But there are a number of areas we need to clarify. It's a long ordinance, as you can tell, but Corporation Counsel's office did prepare that memo. We know the things that we need to address. We simply need some people that, quite honestly, are going to be able to stand up and offer the perspective to the rest of the board members, hey, this is what we think our community needs. Because like I just laid out with just the size of the gathering, like that is a prime policy area for the county board. There's no right or wrong answer in terms of what size of gatherings you want to regulate, but there are a lot of other operational areas we just need to fix. I mean, the fee structure we have for permits, based on the review that we've done, that Mike has done, I don't think is appropriate. I don't think it fits within the statute. Our timing in terms of when those need to be received doesn't fit in terms of that court case. And we also need to provide additional clarity to the public. The ordinance right now doesn't make a distinction between what areas it applies in and what areas it does not. It seemingly applies in all areas across the county with some exceptions for fairs, farm progress days, and any defined places of worship or stadiums. But by law, this county doesn't have the ability to regulate in an incorporated area. So if the Village of Cronenwetter, regardless of whether it has an assembly ordinance, this ordinance wouldn't apply in the Village of Cronenwetter. Because the village, by not acting, is saying any assembly is okay, and if they do have an ordinance, and I don't know if you do, if you have your own specific one, that would control. Similarly, the city of Wausau. The city of Wausau has an ordinance that controls. Your ordinance would apply in all unincorporated areas of the county. It's not limited because it's not a zoning ordinance. It's not limited to county zoned towns. It's all unincorporated areas, absent some town having a specific statute relative to, or specific ordinance relative to assembly. So there's a lot of those policy areas that I think I just don't want to have staff do it because I don't think it's very productive, because you're going to want to have those discussions at the full board anyway. I'd like to bring one member from each of those committees in early.
Thank you. And we kind of got bogged down when we initially took this. Remember, it was called a sports event. It would deal with with gatherings that, and they were marathons and bicycles, and so this is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I apologize. I meant to get into that as well. So again, the impetus to this was we were getting all these requests. So there's the ordinance side, and then there's the policy side in terms of application. We started this conversation because Jim and the sheriff's office and parks were getting these requests to support these events, and we didn't have good, strong guidance on whether or not we do that just as part of our work, in addition to all of our work, without a policy that says we need to seek full cost recovery. And we did get through a lot of that discussion with joint meetings with public safety and infrastructure, where the guidance, the general guidance that I took from those meetings, having sat through them, was, hey, we want to move to a full cost recovery system, particularly for those events. A lot of these events charge money, right, to participants. You have a large event, they charge an entry fee, whether it's a marathon or some other event, that, hey, it's not part of our general obligation of government to support nonprofit events. Municipalities have a different approach. We talked about that back in September. A lot of them, Supervisor Hardinger brought up, a lot of municipalities have tourism committees where they can go and ask for funding for certain events and ask for support. The county hasn't historically had that, other than through the Extension Education Economic Development Committee. They used to have a $50,000 allocation through the budget a number of years ago that they could use to support various events. But to your point, Chair McEwen, that was the other part of this. Absent the direction from those bodies back in 2019 changing, and I haven't heard, I certainly don't want to speculate as to whether it would change. I would envision us incorporating within our operational policies that if we do get requests and we are going to serve as, if law enforcement is going to serve as the security, the deliverer, of the provider of the security services that might be mandated under this assembly, ordinance that we would charge for our full cost. But if that's changed, or if it does change through this process, we will implement whatever policy comes from it. But you're absolutely right. That was another area of discussion. It was actually the thing that started the discussion with those sports events, the events that would be taking place on highways, and Jim would be requested to, hey, we need barrels to block off this route or signage, that if we do those things, the direction we seemed to take from those discussions was that we would charge our true cost to those events, which very often is going to put those events in a place where they're going to find someone else to do it, which I don't know if anyone has a value judgment on it. I think it's great. We have enough work to do, and those events can make the best decision for them. But that was that other piece that we could easily incorporate. Quite honestly, as I referenced in September, I think that's the easier piece if the board is still of the same mind that, hey, we should have that cost recovery approach. That's relatively easy for us to put in place.
Thank you. So what's the committee, where do we want to pick up with this as far as, I agree with the, recovering as far as the true cost, but that doesn't help with, the policy issue as far as what kind of services are we going to expect highways and sheriff's department and parks, to offer for these events that occur? Sure.
So my plan moving forward is I have to, as I think all of you know, I have to submit my annual proposed work plan to the board for it to prioritize. My goal is to at least have the three representatives identified from this committee, Environmental Resources and Public Safety, to put into that proposal, that proposed work plan, and then you as board members will figure out where that falls in terms of what really is priority work. If it kind of rises to the top, it'll get done. If it doesn't, whoever is the lucky representative from this committee might still escape work. But that was kind of my goal, was to at least be able to say, this is where we're at in the work plan, this is where this project is, and then allow the board to say, is this a priority to really move to the top or not?
Thank you. I guess that's a good point. What if these three individuals from I'm just going to say the three vice chairs, not indicating that, but the three vice chairs from each one of these committees, what are we going to ask them to accomplish? What's the goal of this task force for a recommendation to each of their standing committees?
So my thought process at this time is really and I did a little of this work already just to start to put together my work plan. It's to identify those, in my mind, what are more policy-driven decisions within the ordinance, like size of gathering, timing of gathering, whether or not there's areas of the county or certain specific exemptions where you don't want to regulate, those truly policy issues that the board is going to have to make a choice on what they want to regulate. Bring those things to that group and have them talk about it and give staff the direction of how you want to incorporate it in the ordinance, and then staff would make those changes, and we would bring that draft to that group first, have them consider it, again, make some modifications, and ultimately, if it's a priority, move that through whatever standing committee process the board envisions in updating this, and ultimately bring it to the full board for modification. I don't envision it being too terribly onerous to update this ordinance. I mean, Mike put together a nice memo outlining the areas that, based on the court case review he did, that we really need to change. But it is outlining what is the intent of this ordinance, what gatherings do we really want to regulate, and then getting some form of general consensus from that group as to what that regulation looks like. A lot of these ordinances, as I referenced last time, are very similar. The problem with that is that they're similarly then defective in light of that court case. So we need to make sure, again, I think there's a lot of logical support for why you would require, if you have 10,000 people, law enforcement, and you're serving alcohol and it's an 8-hour event, it's a good thing to have require some level of law enforcement. It's a good thing. I think Supervisor Hardinger brought this up in September when you met. It's a good thing to actually have EMS on site, like a certain number of EMS professionals on site, because particularly if you're out in a more rural area and there's 10,000 people, something could happen and you want somebody available to address it. It's just like you think about a Packer game. I mean, there's security at a Packer game, there's security at a Bucks game. It's a large gathering of people. You have those emergency plans in place. But again, my desire is to have some policymakers have those discussions and understand kind of the thought process that they're going to come up with for those recommendations within that ordinance, so that it's not staff bringing an ordinance that by its very nature has a lot of policy decisions baked into it without elected official engagement. I don't think that's a recipe for success for anybody. Staff shouldn't be making those determinations. So I would like to have those three people. If it's the vice chairs, that's the easy button. But that's, again, a determination by the body.
Whatever, yeah, it could be the chairs or the vice chairs or one of the other members. Like I said, the important thing is that, to get this started. So, I'm on infrastructure, I'm looking for somebody that would be willing to serve on this task force or whatever we want to call it, a committee, to represent infrastructure.
I just have. I'd like to know what part of Marathon County is going to be served by this ordinance, because you talk that the municipalities, zoning, townships wouldn't be eligible, wouldn't fall under this ordinance?
If you're a incorporated municipality, this ordinance would not apply within the incorporated municipal boundaries. It would apply in all unincorporated areas, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, unless that unincorporated municipality adopted an ordinance on this topic relative to assemblies. Is that accurate, Mike?
Yes.
So if, example, Town of McMillan would make their own ordinance, they wouldn't have to follow the county's ordinance.
Correct.
So don't you think we need to find out how many are willing to fall under this ordinance? Town of Day, who I represent, Town of McMillan, if you come up with an ordinance, I'm going to make my own and cut the county off, because, sometimes county policies, everybody, if it's right or wrong, does not agree with county policy. If it comes to zoning or if it comes to health department.
Sure. And that's one of the areas, those other requirements within the ordinance is something we need to clean up. And I will give you my personal response to that, and that is fantastic, because then
That's all for you.
yeah, we want municipalities to do what's best for their constituents. The absence of regulation, however, I have colleagues, for example, in Chippewa County, they have large music festivals. Their assembly ordinance, they utilize it for those, and it served them very well. It provides a framework for that. If you have, think the Hodag Music Festival, for example, you have tens of thousands of people, or the Taste and Glow Festival, tens of thousands of people. Do you want to have a process in place where there at least is a framework to encourage people to consider certain things when they're putting that plan together, like security, water, garbage, toiletry, fencing plans, parking plans? Those are all things within that ordinance already that those individuals should consider. Insurance, all those things are required through the ordinance, if nothing else, to get the organizer to give thought to having them. In the absence of that, there's no requirement for that person to do it. If a town or a municipality makes that informed choice, certainly that's something, that's that municipality's choice. I will tell you, every municipality that I've looked at, every county has a pattern ordinance like this. However, my caveat to that is, based on Mike's review, they're all similarly defective in that same fashion.
So this ordinance isn't followed now at all in Marathon County? Or just pick and choose, or?
I'm not aware of any event submitting a policy, submitting a permit for this. I do recall that we had a large event in the town of Easton that did not fit the criteria for the permit, but we did look at whether or not they would be required to submit the permit, and had the discussion with that organizer through zoning and through the health department to assist them in considering a lot of the items underneath this permit. Again, if your event is taking place in an incorporated municipality, you're not subject to it right now. So a lot of the large events within the city of Wausau that you might be familiar with, they're happening in an incorporated area. This wouldn't apply either. I think in September, there was the example of the steam show, which I think has happened within an incorporated municipality in the past. That too would not fall under this regulation. And under your current regulation, there's an exception within the Assembly's ordinance for any assembly that is affiliated with an existing municipality. So the Taste and Glow Festival, for example, in its most recent iterations was affiliated or sponsored by the town of Stettin, as I understand. So that too would be outside of this assembly in its current form. But those are, again, the policy determinations that I think it would be helpful to have elected officials weigh in on. What exceptions do you want to have?
So now, like with the steam show, say Farm Progress Days, Marathon Fun Days, when the county supplies police support, that's on the county? Or is there some kind of a kickback from these groups, from the steam show, from like when they had Farm Progress Days? I mean, they had a lot of county police patrolling that. I mean, is that just something that we do, or something they kick in on, or how does that work?
I'm not aware of how it's worked in the past. I think that's one of the conversations that we need guiding policy on. And right now, as what I've heard, at least going back to 2019, was that the public safety and infrastructure committees were more supportive of the cost recovery approach. That if county staff were requested to be at an event, that we should have a mechanism to recover those costs. If that's different, please let us know. Historically, I do know, I mean, the sheriff is a constitutionally elected officer, and they are empowered by state statute to make determinations about the allocation of resources and how they, where they direct their deputies to patrol, and in what number. So I don't know how that's worked in the past. I don't know, Jim, if you have any additional information as to if you've received any such requests recently.
Just going back to your question, Tom, Farm Technology Days, we did not receive anything at that, either in, when it was on the Ross Farms or on 97, we did not receive anything. I guess one thing that we need to look at is, when they said it's in a incorporated area that this policy will not take effect, excuse me, most of the requests we get, however, are within the incorporated areas. I think one of the biggest areas that we have is remote, and so, especially if they become a village, how do we approach it at that point? Do we say that we do still want 100% recovery on those? Because again, most of our requests are within the incorporated village, the incorporated areas.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson?
Well, this isn't an assembly issue. It is an assembly issue. It is a gathering issue, and it is an event issue. And you know, the problem is that what led us to this discussion was that we were getting requests sometimes at the last minute from people, can you throw signs up on weekends with highway crews? Can you have the parks staff available, creating overtime demands and burning out staff? And so I think we have to figure out what the county's role is relative to supporting of events separate from the issue of assemblies. Because we will get those requests that will be demands for the sheriff's department, the parks department for marking, flagging, traffic directional. So I think it's a bigger issue than just the assembly side of things. And we'll have to say what is our policy? When do we do it? And then the events themselves, you need to look at that ordinance. But I think we want to be careful not to create the expectation that it's one or the other, but it is both.
Thank you.
If I could just, I think that's true. The only caveat I would have is you already have practices in place in some of your departments for event support. The best example is the Parks Department. When events are taking place on park property, we already have reservation agreements that happen. The 9 Mile, if something's happening in 9 Mile, the Ragnar race, for example, they have event agreements that spell out very much in very great detail what the county is going to do to support that event and what we will be paid to carry that out and for the rental of the space. So I think Supervisor Robinson's absolutely correct. That's why I do think they're intertwined, because your exceptions you're going to identify within your assembly ordinance, they are directly related to those events that are already taking place in county-owned property. I think it makes sound sense to have county-owned park property exempted from your assembly ordinance, because you're already considering those things. Marathon Park, for example, although that's in the city of Wausau, imagine it wasn't. It would be, let's go with the Dells of the Old Plain. If there's something going to happen out there, there's already a mechanism for that regulation. But again, finding someone from this committee that would like to be sitting through those conversations, so that when the conversation's happening in this boardroom, that staff aren't in the position of trying to, I mean, we shouldn't be supporting something we came up with that is policy related. That should be, in my mind, that's an elected official area of responsibility.
Thank you. So what, I guess, besides trying to find a volunteer from this committee, to serve on that, that's what public safety is going to have to do and ERC. So I don't see any hands right now. Is there anybody willing to serve on this committee? Supervisor Robinson?
I think the idea of the vice chairs is one, and if Supervisor Dickinson is not interested, I would be willing to help.
Thank you. So I will reach out to Supervisor Dickinson and tell him he was appointed to the committee and see what he says. And he can always refuse it. But Supervisor Seibert?
How much of a job would it be to see a map of the area that would be included and the area that is not included, and how many events the included areas have in a year? There might not be one event held outside an incorporated area in Marathon County.
The couple questions there. I can work with CPZ to do a map of, essentially, it's just all the municipal boundaries. That's easy enough. I know there are more than one event in unincorporated areas. The Taste and Glow Festival is in an unincorporated area. It certainly. Yeah. So there are events. It's just a question of at what level do you want to set your assembly? Because I think Supervisor Robinson's spot on. An event might not trigger your assembly ordinance, but there nevertheless may be a request for county staff support. A marathon's a great example. I mean, they don't have 3,000 people running a marathon, the Wausau Marathon, or observing it, quite honestly. But they do request staff to assist in the execution of that event.
Okay, thank you. So that's, I guess that would be the next step then, is to try to form this task force. And then they could work with staff to get this moving forward. I don't know if there's anything else, Administrator Leonard, you want us, like I said, we need to get somebody talking about it, and that would be this task force.
One member from each committee, just so I can have that, and it sounds like your Supervisor Dickinson has been nominated in his absence.
I will ask him.
That's great. And then I'll put it on the work plan. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I mean, if the county board, we have very limited resources as staff to carry out a lot of these things. If this is a priority, then we have that groundwork laid of identifying who we're going to have the conversation with. If the county board takes the approach in the work plan evaluation, says, hey, this really isn't a top priority, then very likely it's not going to get addressed, but at least we have that historical background. We have the committee members that would be participating in it. But that's my next step, is once I have those individuals, I'll put it in the work plan and I'll ask the county board to prioritize it.
Okay, thank you. We don't need a resolution we could just go a work group instead of a task force to work on this
That would be preferred.
okay. So we got a sense of moving forward with identifying the individuals from public safety, and we have one for sure on infrastructure, either Supervisor Robinson or Dickinson, and then ERC. So do you want me to reach out to public safety and ERC chairs, or?
I plan on doing that.
Okay, thank you. Any other Supervisor Cyber?
I'll cancel my request for that map.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Jim, anything you want to add, or no? Okay. All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to 7D, review of the 2022 PACER rating, and Kevin Lang will be handling that. That's in your packet also. I believe it's on towards the back of the packet. 22? Yeah. Kevin? Go ahead.
Thank you. Ooh, my screen just shut down. Yeah, pages 22 and 23 has the PACER information. 22 is the data that we have. We included 2007 through 22, what our average PACER ratings were. Page 23 is just it's a quick kind of narrative of what the PACER ratings are. Just to give you a quick little briefing, it's a 1 to 10 rating. 10 is going to be a new construction. And then usually we get down to about a 4 and maybe sometimes a 3 before we're going in and doing work on those projects. If you were at a 2 on a county highway, every one of our phones would be ringing constantly every day. So those are usually very, very poor roads, usually on very low volume. So what we have in there is our target for our department is to maintain a PACER rating at 7. So that's an average rating. So for every 6 and 8, that it averages out to a 7, and we kind of show that with the bell curve down in the bottom. We have lower numbers of 3s and 4s and lower numbers of 9s and 10s, and the bulk of our system is in that 6, 7, 8 rating. So those are our fair to good roads in there. We have a little bit of deviation each year. We typically replace pavement on about 30-some miles of road each year, whether it's full reconstructions or just overlays to keep those values up. But basically, you see the level of improvement we've been making over the past about 10 years in there has been maintaining that PACER rating right around that 7 mark. Some years we're a little bit above, some years we're a little bit below. Last year we were at a 7.02, and this year our average is a 6.98. So we're hanging in there pretty tight to where our target of 7 is. So I guess if anybody has questions on that, any comments?
Any questions for Kevin? I know Before we did our budget discussion, we had talked about if this committee wanted to keep the PACER rating at 7, and everybody agreed with that, so that's what this committee has adopted, so. Any questions for Kevin? Okay, well, thank you very much for the information.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, we're going to move on to 7E, review of the 2023 WSDOT routine maintenance agreement, and Jim's going to handle that. And that's in your packet also. I think it goes back to page 5, it starts.
Yeah, that's the main page right there that you have up. There was a modest increases here in the state routine maintenance agreement of $30,500. One nice thing about the state is if you do go over your routine maintenance, they continue to pay the bills. Currently, we're on pace to be about $200,000 over this year. That'll come down a little bit because they project what you spend in each month, November being the Holy Weekend there for deer hunting. We have a lot of people on vacation and stuff, so we start to level off. But we are projected to be about 5 to 7% over this year in the routine maintenance agreement. Region-wide, we're about 2% over the numbers, but I did sign the contract and did send it in already. Again, so it's a modest increase of $30,500. And with that, we'll still also have our DMA's discretionary maintenance agreements, our PBMs, performance-based maintenance agreements coming up to do extra work as the projects come up. But just for your information, that was submitted back to the DOT and approved it with the $30,000, $500 increase.
Any questions? Comments? This is done every year?
Correct. This is an annual contract.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Jim? All right, thank you. Moving on to 7F, update on purchase of land, purchases or future building site.
Unfortunately, this is going to be a very short topic here. We started working with the appraiser to go through the parcel of land that we had talked about in the town of Satine. Once we got everything lined up, I approached the landowner and found out that he had sold it about 2 months ago. So that parcel is off the board. I have talked to a realtor. I know Lance has had some conversations with the city of Wausau. So basically, we're back to square one again.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson and Supervisor Seibert.
Is there any potential to approach the new owner?
They were still in closing at that time. I don't believe the new owner bought it for development. He didn't buy it to resale.
Thank you.
Jim,
Supervisor
does Marathon County own any land in Marathon County already that could be used, could be utilized? I know I talked to you about the airport land, and I'm on the airport board, and they've got acres and acres and acres and acres that aren't in their master plan. They bought it to stop housing development around the airport. If we already own it,
There is none with the original plan of what we needed if we combine all of our services together. We've looked at different parcels. There's none in the area that we're targeting. We own hundreds of acres, but I don't believe we want to build out up in the town of Harrison or down in the town of Spencer. We need to be on city sewer and water, and there's no parcels that we own that are contiguous enough in that area.
even the airport, the airport has city and sewer.
The
They have
airport,
access to the highway.
the airport would just be too far away from, I mean, we're starting to look at coming out of the Mosinee, and we're still trying to serve the northern part of the town of Satine that comes out of the Wausau shop, the northern area of north of Brokeout, the Highway WW. The time delay to just to get there would not be adequate. And also, Lance has mentioned also, you start adding on the cost of fuel to travel those distances.
Go ahead, Administrator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think your question's a very good one about, taking a fresh look and what parcels make sense. The one thing I always come back to is something that I heard from speaking with, I can't remember if it was this master planner or someone else. 85% of the lifetime cost of your building are operational costs. It's not I know we're going to have to pay a significant amount of money for any parcel that's going to meet the criteria in terms of location, because we want the same location that other prime, large industrial, commercial businesses want. Near highways, easy on, easy off, centrally located. It's a desirable piece of property. If we were to locate in those parcels that Jim's talking about, if you think about what our plow trucks get, Jim, what's the miles per gallon for diesel? 3. So not many. When you locate yourself, even if it's 5 miles further from that interchange you need to get to disperse our people to do the work, you start to bump up against that initial kind of higher cost property acquisition really, really fast. When you think about, hey, what does that look like for miles per gallon, the number of plows we have going out, and the amount of work just for winter maintenance. So it's going to be a complex evaluation, but the bottom line up front, right now, the parcels that we've identified and we've talked about just don't seem to be panning out. But I still do have to have some additional conversations with the city to see what opportunities might exist. And I've talked about this in closed session with this group. The county does own a number of pieces of very desirable property, to your point, Supervisor Soibert, that perhaps those things would be desirable to the city or other municipalities, the city of Wausau or other municipalities we can look at similar property we have to see if that would work. But that's kind of where we are, just to keep the group informed.
Thank you. Supervisor Straub?
Thank you. Yes, Jim, if I remember correctly, when we had those potential properties identified for what would make a good site, now we lost the first choice one, I believe, that we settled on. Was the second one still available?
This one that we were just talking about, Natona Sateen, was the second one already.
Was there a plan C?
There was a site possibly in the town of Rib Mountain, but talking to some officials out there, that's as good as 1 and 2.
That's not viable anymore? Plan C is no good anymore? Thank you.
Looking for a plan D at this point.
We can always turn it into A because we don't have an A anymore. So, is there any other questions, comments for Jim? I guess we were talking about contracting with a realtor. Is that?
I did reach out to a realtor, and I had some conversations with Michael. If we go much farther with a realtor, we're probably going to have to go for an RFP for that. But my initial conversation with the realtor was just trying to get a feel what's out there.
Great, thank you. Good. Mike? Oh, Supervisor Straub?
Thank you. I heard Tom mention potential of Mosinee being a viable spot. Is there anything in Cronenwetter coming a little bit north? Still too far away?
Cronenwetter is probably our limits. I believe they did take a look in there when they did the study, and I don't believe they found anything at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess I'm not familiar with the existing site would not be a site to rebuild a new property on?
It
New
does
building
not
on?
fit into our master plan. We're sitting on about 11 acres there. The study showed if we combine forces with the other departments, we're looking at a 40-acre site. Could we squeeze back onto our site? Possibly. You would not have the best location yet, the best land use, probably not. If that site was just empty right now and you could start from scratch, you could probably make it work. Talking to the architect, it would be really hard to build that site with us trying to keep an operation. If we could just take a 2-year break and they could tear everything down and start over, possibly. But for us to stay operable, that would be very tough to work with.
Thank you. Supervisor Seibert?
Jim, how far west would work? I mean, towards on, off of 29, towards Marathon?
We looked, the Highway O is probably about as far as west as we'd want to go. At one point, we kind of looked at a couple sites over there. There was one site that came up very close to the Rib River. I don't know if we want to start building salt sheds close to the Rib River because it's still possible runoff. So there were some sites out there, but there's no water out that far. Water only goes probably as far as past 72nd a ways. I don't know. Yeah, up in the northern part, but along Highway 29, it doesn't go out that far.
So that Marathon interchange, that's too far? Because they're going to have water and sewer.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but again, you're probably pushed past the limits there.
Okay.
Again, our WASA facility covers areas not all the way out to the eastern border, but the Highway J, WW, that all comes out of the WASA shop. So now if you start taking a truck from Marathon out to WW, your service is going to be reduced. You're looking at, again, as much as Lance has mentioned, fuel costs, and then you're also looking at safety.
You have all those outreach state plants, 97 has got one, I don't know how many there are. Would a smaller one for the Wausau area be, and then build your major one outside of that?
We are.
Gas mileage area?
That's something's being kicked around, and matter of fact, I have a meeting with Brian tomorrow at the airport. We talked about one point, maybe when we do build the Wausau site, do we expand the Mosinee site, like you said, and run 2 more shops, 2 more sites out of there? We do have the Hatley one. Land's limited there, where we're up against the border there with wetlands on the east side and a road on the north and west. So, could we add on there? We could maybe squeeze 1 more shop, 1 more truck out of there. So site development is the big cost in a lot of these projects. So, if you start looking at doing site development on 3 or 4 locations, are you better off just biting the bullet and taking it at 1?
Thank you. Supervisor Stroh?
Jim, would it still be, would the purchaser of the land where the desired spot in Stettin, would that buyer, developer be approachable to say, and would he be maybe interested in a land trade, something to sweeten up the deal where he could understand the urgency of our situation and perhaps say, yes, I like that land you have over there. I could make my development work there. I would do a deal with you. Is he approachable, he or she? Do you think?
I've never talked to the developer at all, so I just talked to the person that was selling the land, so.
And would that seem, do you think that would be something we could maybe try? I mean,
I guess we can try anything.
and at what,
Can we try anything, Michael? All right.
well, because it seems to me that that's the most desirable location, and I think a developer, if we could offer him or her or that company on a trade and make a sweet deal of some sort, they would understand the situation that the county is in, and that the location we're kind of hamstrung without that. We're fishing for ideas. Like you said, we can go plan A, B, C, D all the way down the alphabet, and we're still going to be actually struggling and settling for something less than desirable for our needs. And I think any reasonable person, if we approached them with a good mechanics in place of a land trade or something, so their ambitions and profits could be realized using lands that we really don't even have any immediate need for or use for, we could do a trade, a land exchange.
I can reach out to the seller to find out who that was and pass that information on to Lance.
Okay, well, yeah, that's, there's options, like I said, and we're going to continue to explore all the options. So that's, if that's the what the committee wants to do, we can ask Jim to reach out to the seller and find out, who the new buyer is going to be. But other than that, I don't know of any other direction unless something else comes up, property.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think one piece, and this has kind of been alluded to, it's this outside-the-box approach of Jim referenced, let's look at all of our pieces of property that we operate our highway department out of, and is there rather than the kind of one central shop, what might some other approach to service delivery look like? I think is something that now it behooves us to start to take a look at. Jim and I can talk to see what that might entail in terms of analysis, but I can add that to the work plan. It'll be, in my mind, it's two separate tracks moving simultaneously, and I don't know how far we'll go down the one alluded to by Supervisor Straub. I mean, we can reach out and see if there's interest there. And once we know that, we'll further kind of define what our next steps are. We'll just keep you informed. Again, the whole point of this is, with the last several items, are really just to keep you informed as to, what conversations we've had and whether they've been fruitful or not.
Thank you. Any other questions, suggestions, ideas? Okay. Well, I guess, Laz, I would be curious then, when you talk about all this property that we have, is there any that could be utilized? Is it big enough? I mean, if there isn't, we can kind of scratch that off the list unless, like I said, 40 acres is a big chunk of land.
Yeah, and I think as Jim alluded to, we've been working off a couple of key assumptions, and some time ago, staff came to this committee for the West Side Master Plan and got direction from the committee that, hey, long-term, that 20 to 50-year vision for Marathon Park and the West Side properties, that the Highway Department, the committee said, Highway Department shouldn't be there. So that master plan development is proceeding with that idea in mind. Similarly, as Jim referenced, there was this desire to, hey, if we can combine the Parks Department, Parks, Rec, and Forestry, Conservation Planning and Zoning was part of that discussion for a while, as well as Emergency Management with the Highway Department. We can consolidate our footprint. We've actually had some recent developments that I think, going back to Jim's earlier point about, do we have other options for consolidation with those departments that don't require them to go at the same site as highway? And I think the answer to that is certainly yes. Conservation Planning and Zoning is one. We have a plan that I think actually will serve the county better long-term, that doesn't require the additional expense of locating them at the Highway Department. It requires certainly some expense to locate them at another site, co-located with county services. But I think there's a lot of things that have happened, which is the case with master plans, right? They're meant to be this vision, and they're a vision until you do something and say, hey, you know what, we can do something better. And I think we're kind of there, not only with Conservation Planning and Zoning, but also we have some analysis we need to do for Parks, Rec, and Forestry to see if there's some other opportunity to not have them go on the site of any future Highway Department shop, which would perhaps shrink the footprint we need for that future highway shop, which would reduce costs and also open up some opportunities for us in terms of what properties would work. So we'll keep going down those paths and have those conversations, but as is often the case with something like this, it's not likely to move fast, but we'll keep you informed each month.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, thank you for the update on that. Moving on to 7G, WISDOT policy on changing the capitalization threshold on equipment repairs from 25% to 5%. Jim?
This is just for your information. I know it was part of the Lance's budget message, but one thing we have talked about is for the 2024 budget, now that we got the 23 finally out of the way, looking at 2024 budget, the CIP funding that we had mentioned earlier needs to be looked at again. Again, we've been getting the same $957,600 for about 12 years now. Looking at some of the numbers here, a pickup truck's gone up 69%, a paver 57%, snow removal equipment 63%. So on top of that now, the DOT has thrown this one at us, that we need to capitalize anything that we do repair on that is 5% of the cost of that vehicle. So what does that mean? If we have a grader that the depreciation value is starting to get low on, we need to put new tires around that whole grader. We need to capitalize that grader, which comes out of that same $957,600. So now our buying power of the $957,600 has just dropped dramatically with these added costs out of that same fund. So again, this one for your information, some more stuff to you to think about when you start looking at the CIP funding. These costs need to come out of that pot of money now also.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson?
What's the rationale for dropping that to 5% besides spreading it out over a longer period and reducing their?
I believe that's their only cost. I know it's the Wisconsin County Highway Association. We're still talking to the DOT about this. They probably didn't follow the proper channels to get this, but right now this is what's on the books. And that's exactly their rationale behind it, is to spread those costs out over a longer period of time for some of the counties. Talking to some of the counties, they said, hey, this is not a bad idea for us because it spreads out the cost of those repairs. Will it go back to 25%? Probably not. Will it stay at 5%? Probably not, but right now that's what the manual says is 5%. We're hoping to get that raised back up to something. Again, we had this conversation at our regional meeting speaking to Lincoln County. John thought it should be at 10%. I'm still pushing that should go back to 25, but it depends on how the county has their capital improvement and how they purchase their equipment set up.
Thank you. John?
I think Jim raised a valid point in that our rolling stock and our commitment to replacement for the Sheriff's Department, for Highway, for Parks, and how we approach IT all need to be reviewed going forward. So I think that will be something that the HR Finance Committee will be taking a look at, because you can't keep the level stagnant while we've got all these inflationary pressures.
Thank you. This has already started for 2023, or?
This policy just went in place last week. It's hit the highway maintenance manual, so it's currently in place. Again, Wisconsin County Highway Association is having conversations with WSDOT on it, but if you open the manual right now, it says 5%.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Supervisor Sarver.
Thank you. Jim, I just have an old question. How many trucks are coming out of the park department site? The Marathon Park, how many trucks are operated out of that shop?
Out of the Marathon Park?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean our
Right,
main
out of the
shop?
highway department.
Oh, you're going to make me do math, Tom. I would say probably we have 36 sections, and I would say more than half. We have 3 that come out of Abbotsford, 3 that come out of Mosinee, 4 that come out of there. I would say around half of us, probably about 18.
Well, how many units would you have to
18
move?
and probably about 5 more graders.
How many units would you have to move out of that site to different sites to make that site viable?
We would have to make that site viable. It's a kind of a loaded question. Can we make it work? Yes. Right now, when our trucks come in at night, they need to take their plows off. They plow till 11 o'clock at night examples, 2 nights ago when we had that ice storm. Our guys came in at 3 o'clock, they had to take the plows off. They go back out at 6 o'clock, they got to put the plows back in. We've outgrown that building, even if we'd only run 2 trucks out of that building. The building is not big enough for our equipment that we have out there right now. So, you're talking about snow plowing sections. So during the summer, we bring all those sections back into Wausau because we pave out of Wausau. All of our main operations is coming out of there. So the snow plowing operations, while it's big for us, is not our total operation.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Supervisor Strobe?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question, I know it's not on the agenda, but I remember Jim telling us that when we hired new snowplow operators, they were very inexperienced. How are they turning out, if I may ask that question?
We got some great ones, and we have some that probably need a little bit more training.
Because I remember you made a comment, I hope we don't get the big one right out of the gate this year. So it's working out then, I assume?
Michael's really looking at me on
Yeah,
this one, so.
I think that probably can be discussed later, but thank you. All right. All right. No other questions on the policy change. Moving on to number 8. Before we get to that, in your packet on it's page 24 to 30, there is some updates from CCIT. The information got in the packet, but the agenda item wasn't posted, so I'll take that responsibility. I didn't catch that, but you might want to look at that information on the updates, and Jerry Klein will be happy to go over it at our next meeting. So, but just want to mention it. That's why it's in the packet. Moving on to number 8, next meeting date, time, location, announcements, and future agenda items. Committee members are asked to bring items for future discussion. I do want to remind the committee that if you are planning on attending the 2023 Winter Road School Conference, January 23rd to the 25th, in Wisconsin Dells at the Chula Vista Resort. If you could let Jim or myself know, probably no later than next week. There is a time limit on the registration. So if you plan on going, if you could let one of us know. And the next meeting is January 5th, 2023, 9 o'clock here at the courthouse. Is there any other discussion? Go ahead.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce Lance Mueller to everybody on the committee. He's our new transportation planner that we've just hired to work for the MPO, but he's also a full county staff member, so he will be probably sitting in on these meetings and getting involved with everything you've talked about today at some point. So just wanted to welcome him, to let you guys know who he was. You want to say anything?
Well, welcome, and we'll look forward to asking you a lot of questions at infrastructure, so thank you. All right, any other comments? Any information? Okay, then I'll look for number 9, motion by Supervisor Robinson, second by Supervisor Seibert. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.